Let's get on to hot shots now. Stocks soared following President Trump's announcement of a one-month tariff exemption for automakers. During a call with the Canadian PM Justin Trudeau, the two leaders discussed tariffs, but no significant progress was made in easing the trade tensions. Trump expressing concerns over Canada's efforts to curb the flow of fentanyl into the US as key talks continue. Meanwhile, decisions on new tariffs affecting Canada and Mexico still anticipated, with hints of potential product exemptions on the table. Have a look.
The big three auto dealers, we are going to give a 1-month exemption on any autos coming through USMCA. Reciprocal tariffs will still go into effect on April 2nd, but at the request of the companies associated with USMCA, the president is giving them an exemption for 1 month so they are not at an economic disadvantage. So the three companies that he spoke to are Stellantis, Ford, and General Motors. They requested the call, they made the ask, and the president is happy to do it. It's a 1-month exemption.
For more, we are joined by Kyle Rodder from Capital.com. Great to see you. 1-month exemption. What do you think of all this, and how do the markets react?
Well, the markets reacted very positively to it. I mean, I think in essence what market participants are concerned about is whether, Trump is really trying to shake up the US trading order and change it wholesale, or whether, as has been spoken about a lot since Trump took power, or certainly was elected, this is some sort of negotiating tactic to achieve something else, and that the worst of the tariffs won't actually materialize. The fear is not so much the tariffs that have gone on, although they will be very disruptive. We're already seeing that manifest in the economic data, especially forward-looking surveys. The fear is that this is just the beginning, and things will get worse from here. And there's a high degree of uncertainty about how this could potentially evolve. This kind of tit for tat dynamic that could really significantly impact US and global growth. The auto exemptions are very relevant in particular because it probably acknowledges or it's a recognition from the Trump administration that the supply chains of the modern world are actually very, very complicated, and that it's not simply a matter of one company buying something from an import from Mexico, for example, to sell on into the United States, or at least use as an import into their product. A lot of these businesses are actually basically transacting within themselves or trading within themselves, crossing the border, so to speak, several times to be able to create the same product. And it has this kind of accumulative impact on costs, which everyone was concerned about, and was also very highly concerning from an economic standpoint. So there seems to be a recognition of perhaps a little bit of that, and then again perhaps a sign that the Trump administration doesn't want to drive the US economy off a cliff just to shake up the global trading order.
But they do seem happy to drive everyone else off a cliff, and no one seems to think it's a good idea to bring tariffs along the world order other than the White House. The Wall Street Journal, usually that sticks to the right side of politics, saying it doesn't make any sense, as we heard Justin Trudeau pointing out and reading that quote headline from the newspaper as well. How are the Canadian leaders and the Mexican leaders likely to respond? Because they're caught in a difficult world where if they do tit for tat, it can get out of control and anger and get much worse for businesses right across Canada and Mexico. But if they don't, they look weak, and I suppose that can be bad when dealing with Trump as well. It's a catch-22.
Yeah, it is in many respects in terms of the politics. I mean, I think in terms of the first part of that regarding just the White House's, I guess, intent in using tariffs. Again, there's this kind of argument as to whether this is a sort of more complex play at trying to shake up the global trading and probably financial order as well, whether this is just a strong arming tactic, or whether this is just the behaviour of sort of a fairly irrational man looking for a victory against what he sort of deems more or less as political adversaries, despite the fact that they're traditional allies. It could be any one of those things. The markets are now feeling more confident that this isn't going to be the kind of hill, so to speak, that Trump and the administration is willing to die on and certainly sacrifice the US economy for. Again, going back now to the talk of relations between diplomatic relations between the US and Canada and the US and Mexico, both Canadians and Mexicans are responding very differently to this. Mexico has decided to play a small target, a sort of approach, a policy, haven't really retaliated or said that they'd necessarily retaliate to tariffs. Sheinbaum has sort of said that they'll take a kind of slow and steady, considered approach and continue to negotiate with the United States. However, probably because of the way that this approach from Trump has galvanized the Canadians, especially all this talk of the 51st state and sort of annexing the thing, more or less, is that there seems to be the political will there to push back fairly aggressively on both sides of politics. Poilievre has taken a very similar approach, but in this instance, Trudeau is trying to stand up to Trump too. And they've already said this morning that they won't drop any tariffs, their retaliatory tariffs on the United States in response to this slight reprieve that they've received overnight. So again, it's different approaches, but the game hasn't finished yet, and we're still looking at an arrangement in North America where effectively the trading order is going to be shaken up. It just becomes a question of how big that shake-up will be and whether it continues from here.
Is the issue for markets about consistency? We saw Donald Trump speaking to Congress, and he spoke about tariffs and said this is part of the plan to make America great again. There will be some immediate pain, but he said we'll be okay with that. We think about a month or so ago when he first announced the possibility of 25% tariffs, the markets dropped by about 2%. Global markets were all over the place. Then there was a phone call. A day later, there was a 30-day reprieve. Start of this week, we're back to 25%. The next day, it's automakers get a reprieve. Consistency is hard to follow for poor old investors out there.
Yeah, it is. And I'd say that there's 2 points to this. And the first is that, when the announcements happen, you have to adjust your growth expectations. And that's why stocks fall, or you start to see changes in the currency or bond markets. And that's just simply a function of, tariffs are generally bad for growth, and that has to get priced in. The bigger impact, and this is where things become, I guess you could say, a little non-linear and start, sort of feeding upon themselves in a vicious cycle, is, like you said, kind of the uncertainty. There's the uncertainty for businesses that we're already seeing in business surveys. There's and that's kind of slowing down purchasing decisions, investment decisions, employment decisions, because they can't get any clarity around policy. There's uncertainty for consumers. That's because they're scared that they're going to be having to pay more sometime in the future, so they're they're more inclined to sort of save rather than spend, and we're already seeing that in confidence data. And then there's the uncertainty for investors, which then have to price in a far greater distribution of events or probabilities, which is just to say that the risks are a lot bigger, and that has to manifest in lower asset prices too. So it's, again, like you said, this degree of uncertainty that is really probably the worst part of things, which is overlaid on top of the fact that this is simply just going to be bad for growth, and investors have to price that in as well.